Hello everyone, today's video will be slightly different. We are going to set up a player controller. Well, we're going to do more than just that, that's why I've added advanced to it. We'll be setting up a player controller with the camera and camera motor. We'll also be giving him health, a UI, a fancy death screen that will allow us to load a save point we're setting up as well. Additionally, I will show you how we can set up a playable cover. In order to achieve this, we will need Unity, Game Creator and the Stats module. If you want the player to be able to shoot or melee, you will need those modules as well. What I will be showing here is one of the ways to do things, and there are many other ways. The goal here is to create a base from which you can expand upon if needed. So let's dive in. So before we start setting up our scene, I'm going to show you what the end result will look like. So for demonstration purposes, I'm actually using our basic enemy AI from the first shooter AI tutorial. Now you do not have to do this, you do not have to use this, so if you haven't watched that, that's completely fine. I'm using it to actually demonstrate that we will be taking damage. So let's hit play. Now our enemy is going to walk there, so I will show you what our scene has. So this first square here is a save point. So no, I do not have a message displayed, which I could have done. In the left corner, upper left corner, you will see our health bar and some other information. So this is where we will display the gun. I just prefer to have that all together. So let's hit reload. And here we have our cover. Now when we approach this, it says hold tab to enter cover. And we're in cover. Now the moment I exit, he will automatically go back to his normal stance. So now let's see how the rest works. So our guy here, he will spot us and he will start shooting us. I've removed those ugly purple or pink boxes we saw before, and I've actually adjusted that. And once we die, a ragdoll will trigger and a game over screen appears. When we press load lost save, we are back at our square. So that's everything we'll be doing today. So let's start off by creating our scene. So like I mentioned before, I am going to reuse this scene of our very first shooter AI tutorial. Now you can just create a new scene if you haven't seen that one. That will be fine as well, but I want to demonstrate our characters actually taking damage. So that's why I'll be reusing this one. Let's just duplicate it and open this up. Now in this scene we already have an enemy AI and we already have a player. So what we're going to do first is we're going to remove the camera, we're going to remove the player, we're going to remove the UI. Let's keep the lighting and the main camera, let's remove that as well. Just want to show you how to set up all of these things from scratch. So let's rename this to scene. There we go. I'm going to make this slightly bigger as well, as we will need some space. So our AI needs to move back a little. Let me turn all of this on. And let's move back our AI. There we go. Perfect. So now we just have a couple of basic things. So we have a plane and we have our ammo and guns. Again, you don't have to do this. I just want to demonstrate how this would work with the shooter module, and I will show how this would work with the melee module as well. If you have neither, that's completely fine. You can just completely skip that. Now let's start off by creating a camera. So let's drag that up there. We're not going to touch that at all. And then let's go to game creator and there we go, camera motor. Now in the camera motor we're going to toggle this, so this is going to use the main camera, and if we go here to the main camera you will actually see a hook and a camera controller motor being set up. So that's one of the great things here, is we do not have to do anything ourselves. Game creator takes care of it for us. So this is something we will set up. We're going to make a couple of slight changes, nothing too spectacular. So we have a couple of options here. So adventure camera is basically a third person camera. First person, well, speaks for itself, and then we have all of these other options. Now some of them are great if you want to set up a cutscene, some of them are great for different types of games. I'm just going to keep it at adventure camera, as I prefer to have it in third person. Now let's keep all of this the same, and I already know that we have to slightly offset the target. So I'm already going to set these values. This will mean nothing to you maybe, but basically what we're doing here is we're going to make sure that the camera is not directly behind the player. If it is, you won't be able to see where you're shooting at. That's why games like Gears of War, Uncharted, etc. all have a slight offset for the camera. So there we go. I've also moved the camera slightly closer to our player. I don't want a zoom function. You can use that yourself if you want, but I want the camera to be fixed at this distance. So I'm going to keep it at 2. It's a bit closer to the player, but I personally prefer that. And that's it. That's our camera motor. Now next up, let's actually drag in our player. There we go. And we have our player. Now by default the player actually has most things already set up. There's not a lot you need to add here. Now I'm going to add a shooter component. Again, if you do not have that module, you don't have to do that. It's called player shooter. If you prefer to do it with melee, then please use character melee. But I'm going to use the shooter component, so I'm going to add player shooter. Now this is not the same as you set up for enemy AIs, that's called character shooter. I do not know what the difference is, but I know they're not the same. So let's just keep it at that. And we're going to add the stats module because we want our player to have a health bar. I'm not touching mana in this one, but this is actually quite interesting function. We're going to look at that in a different video. Now we need to make sure that when he gets shot, something happens. So on receive shot is what you need for the shooter module. On receive attack is what you need for the melee module. So if you're setting this up for a melee character, please use on receive attack. So I'm going to use on receive shot and not touch any of this, simply add a condition. Now I'm not going to set up these conditions yet, simply because I want to set up the rest of the scene first, because a lot of these conditions will rely on other things we set up. Now let's just hit play. and there we go. We have our player controller. You can see the slight offset. That will be needed if you want to shoot. If the camera would be straight behind him, we wouldn't see the shoot marker. So that's why we have a slight offset, and that's why you see that in most of these types of games, especially shooters. None of them will be directly behind the player. So take Ghost Recon or Gears of War, Uncharted, they all have this offset. There we go. So for now, that's all we're going to do with the player. We're going to set up the rest later. I want to set up some things in the scene first. So let's start off with adding a save point. There we go. Let's call it a save point, because why would we complicate things? I'm going to add a default red material that is actually already included in Game Creator, simply for it to stand out a bit. I haven't set up any ideal lighting, so otherwise it wouldn't actually stand out whatsoever. That's it, so that's a save point. Let's make sure it doesn't stick out too much. Nothing fancy, it's just for demonstration purposes, just to show you how all of this actually works. And we're going to add a trigger. So let's call this save trigger. And this trigger will have a collider. So it will have a box collider. I'm simply going to move the box collider up a bit, and that's it. So let's hit trigger, and let's add that trigger component. Now we don't want this to be on start, we want this to be when the player enters. So when the player enters, we're going to trigger a action. So let's add that action, and all we're going to do here is add a save. So this video I won't be showing an advanced save system, save load. Just going to keep it really simple. Just save this to the current profile, and that's it. So we will call on this in our when our player dies to load this save point. So that's it. And there we go. We have the save point set up. That's literally all you need to do. Now let's set up our cover as well. Let's actually leave that for later. Let's start with our UI. So this will be a bit more work, and it will be a basic UI, but it will serve a purpose. So we have our UI, so we will need a couple of things. So as you can see, by default, we already have these things set up. Now we want this to overlay our camera. I'm not even going to add the camera itself. It will just automatically work as an overlay. So that's perfect. The scaler is wrong as well. So I want this to scale with the screen size. So no matter what screen size we have, it will scale with it. Perfect. Let's just leave that there, and we're going to add our MO UI component from Playmaker, from Game Creator. Apologies for that. And let's add attribute UI as well. Now we already gave our player health and mana, so let's just display health here. And these are the main components that will allow us to actually set up that canvas. Now this is the actual canvas itself, and as you can see, it's quite big, and in 3D that's, you know, quite hard to actually change. So let's hit that 2D box, and this is perfect for our UI. So here we have our canvas set up. So let's add some components to our UI. So I'm going to go to UI and add an image. Let's call this health background. So I want this to be semi-transparent. And we're going to keep that here. I'm not really sure what sizes I used before. Maybe this is a bit small, I can't really remember. But let's just let's just make it this size. Seems about right. So that's our health background. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. Just going to keep it the standard values. Not really going to touch any of these. I'm going to rename this to health bar delay. Now the reason we have these, and I'm going to duplicate that again, and the reason I'm simply duplicating them is because they need to be on top of the health bar background. These are components our UI calls on. So when we go back to our UI, here you will see several things. So you will see color and value fill image and the value format. Just going to add a slight space to that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to drag in our health bar in color, and we're going to drag in our health bar in value fill image. There's one thing I actually forgot to do. So when we go to these two, we're going to add a source image, which is a square. So this is used by Game Creator. These are materials. So that's what we're going to use. And that's it. I'm not going to touch these. We have our health bar set up. I'm not really sure if the size is good, but that's completely fine. Next up, what we're going to do is we're going to add our MO background. So to keep things simple, I'm just going to duplicate this and drag it below, because maybe let's add some space, which I didn't do the first time. So our MO background, so let's recall it MO background. Perfect. I'm going to remove these two because we don't need those. And is there any tip for when we hit the middle? There isn't. That's just lovely. I guess this is about the middle. I'm not going to nitpick here. So this is where we'll display the information for our MO, and this is where we'll dictate what type of MO we're actually using. So let's add a text. So there we go. We have our text, lovely. Going to keep that in the middle here. Yeah. Seems about right. Seems about the right size. There we go. Oh, and let's make it 12 because it didn't fit. We want it to overflow, so if the text would be too big, it would. Let's just keep it 10. Now maybe this UI is way too small. I'm not really sure. I don't like intrusive AIs, but we'll see what it looks like. And now here we want there to be similar texts. So we're going to call this one ammo name. I'm going to drag it out because it's not part of the background, so let's just drag it on top here. Keep them together. And we're going to add another text object displaying how much ammo we currently have in our gun. So I'm going to center those and we're going to fit them next to each other. There we go. Maybe 10 is better, it's a bit big. And let's just use overflow again. And I really hope this is about the middle. It's fine, whatever. Let's just duplicate this and drag it next to it. And that wasn't really the middle, was it? So let's make these tiny bit smaller. There we go, perfect. Now this one will be the clip, and this one will be the storage. There we go. Right now these are overflowing, that's completely fine. We'll use simple numbers. You know, actually we're going to completely remove the text they have in their box because we need to make sure it actually works properly. So go to UI, and now we're going to drag those things in. So we had ammo name. I'm not doing a description, that's a bit exaggerated. We'll have clip and we'll have storage. There we go. Now you can add some icons, which I did, and I'm actually going to use some stock game creator icons here. It's a bit, you know, obviously if you have your own, that's absolutely great. I just want to make sure you can actually make this with what game creator provides. So let's go here. Now if you hit shift, it won't actually resize. It will actually resize properly. So let's remove this slightly here. There we go. That's about the right size. We're going to duplicate this. So these will just be static images showing us what is what. So here we're going to use a sprite. We're going to use one of the player icons. No, yeah, there we go. And we actually have an ammo icon here as well, provided by game creator. You have to, I'm going to use this one. And there we go, we have our basic UI. So let's actually see if this works. Now I'm going to exit 2D here. Let's just, where's our player? I'm going to focus on our player by hitting F, and there we go. Now when we hit play, we will have our UI. Now let's actually grab a revolver, bullets, and everything works. Now as you can see, black was not the best color to use for the text, so let's change the text color. We'll select them all together and we're going to, there we go, perfect. So now when we hit play again, it will be a lot easier to read. There we go. Let's grab that revolver, and this is way better. Perfect. Now we have our basic UI set up. Nothing fancy, just a basic UI, just to show you how it works. And now you can, you know, make it look a lot prettier. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to create that fancy effect we saw when you die. I've seen it in a game where the camera rotates and all of those things happen. I honestly can't remember which game it was, but there was a game that allowed you to do all of those things. Now, we will need a module here called post-process. So when we go to Window and go to Package Manager, if you already have this, great, but you will need post-processing. Now I have HDRP, so it's integrated in HDRP, but if you do not have HDRP, please, or URP, please make sure you install that package. So let's create an empty here. Let's rename this post-process death, because this is what happens when we die. Now we're going to create a volume, a new profile. Now if you're not using HDRP, the icon might look different, but it's exactly the same idea. So we're going to create a new profile here, PP death profile. Sounds really ominous, but that's fine. I'm going to go in post-processing and I'm going to add a vignette. So the vignette, let's just toggle all of these on. Always annoys me they're turned off by default. So this vignette will be red. Reason it's red is because it's it shows, you know, blood or something like that. So there we go. I'm going to make it rounded. We're also going to distort our camera, so that's why this looks a bit exaggerated, but you'll see in a bit. I want to make our scene slightly darker as well, simply because well, it's, you know, dark times ahead when your character dies, right? Now let's add that distortion. I can't remember which game had that when you die, but I thought it looks pretty cool. Again, you don't have to do any of this. I just think it's quite fun to have this, but there we go. So now we have all of this. If I hit play, you actually see what this will look like if you would have it on by default, which I would definitely not recommend. But having some post-processing is quite fun. Now this looks absolutely horrible in game. Actually reminds me of that Max Payne dream sequence a bit. But we're not going to have this on by default anyway. Now I'm going to go to our UI here. I'm actually going to duplicate it, rename it to Game Over, and drag it in here because we want this UI to be visible together with our post-processing. So I'm going to remove all of this because we do not need this. So let's remove that. But we still have our canvas here. Let me just turn this off a bit because it's really annoying to work with. Let's go to 2D. There we go. So this is our current UI, so let's toggle that off just to make sure we're not confusing anything. So now we have our game over screen. So we're going to add a new text here, UI text. Let's make this bigger. You always want to make sure they feel bad for actually dying, so let's make that a big text. Let's do, well, that's not big. There we go. Game over. Horrible. Bold it. We are darkening the scene, so we have to make sure it's white because with our post-processing the scene will become quite dark actually. And again, like to reiterate that if you do not have HDRP or URP, make sure you download that package of post-processing, and yes, the icons will look slightly different, but you have similar post-processing effects. That's really it. Anyway, so we have our game over text showing our player that he's horrible because he's just died. And now we're going to add a button. This button will allow us to load our save. So go to UI and we're going to add a button. Now, I'm not going to change this to some fancy look, just literally going to keep it like it is. Let's change that text, load lost save. All we're doing is we're loading our lost save game. Now you have a on-click event here. Great, but in order for it to work with Game Creator, we need to add our actions to the on-click. And here, I think it's button, or it's not, it's actions execute. So this will basically tell the on-click event to execute these actions from Game Creator. And we're just going to do load lost game, and that's it. That's all we have to do. Wow, this is not in the middle at all, is it? Let's make sure it's a bit more centered. It's not completely, but fine. Anyway, this looks slightly better. So let's make sure that our volume is enabled again. And as you can see, the screen became quite dark, so that's why we have to add that white text. Now I'm going to disable this because we don't want to see it. I'm going to re-able our UI. And let's turn off 2D. Let's focus on our player again. There we go. So we have these basic things set up now. Now that we've gone over how UI works a bit, I'm going to set up our cover as well. So let's add that cover cube. So the way this works is our cover literally only forces our player to change state. That's it. You can play around with him having to move a certain direction, so he'll stick to the cover, but sticky cover, has its downsides as well. Just want to make sure that once we go near, we change state. Now, if you don't want to use cover in your game at all and you don't find that interesting in the slightest, that's fine. This will still show you how you can trigger certain things with a on trigger enter. So it's not a bad thing to have at all. So let's change that material to red again. We want it to stand out. And let's call this cover. Now our cover will obviously have a trigger, otherwise nothing will happen. So let's call that cover trigger. Beautiful. Now this cover trigger will have a lot of events here, but let's first add the collider, box collider. Let's make sure it's a trigger. Going to make it slightly bigger, and let's move that a bit. You can have it both sides. If you have to make the trigger bigger and just have it on both sides, visible on both sides, and that's it. Just going to add it to this side for now. It's fine. There we go. Now we want to have several triggers here. These are the most interesting ones, really. So we're going to have a trigger that will have well, let me just show you. So when you go to inputs, you have a lot of options here. So you can basically choose a lot of different inputs. I'm going to use on key hold. That's what I'm going to use, on key hold. So we're going to hold the button. We don't want to trigger anything if we do it accidentally. Going to use the tab button, which is really weird, but you really have to scroll down a lot to find the rest, so I'm just going to use tab. And it will execute on key up. So the moment we let go, something will happen. So let's have our first action here. Now we're going to add a new one, because this one will trigger when we exit. So let's add on player exits. So the moment our trigger exit, apologies. So the moment our player, so let's drag in our player here, exits this trigger, we will change his state back again to normal, and he will no longer be in cover. And the last one is going to be on player enter. Oh, apologies, I need to add trigger first. On player enter, let's do enter. Could have actually used on player exit here, I'm not sure why I didn't do that. Anyway, on player enter, we want there to be a text box showing us what we need to do in order to enter that cover. So this is just basic tooltip showing us, what we're doing here. So let's actually add that. So UI, canvas, where's canvas? There we go. Let's call that tip. So this tip is going to be a on-screen, no, it's going to be in the world space. So this is not going to be something that is stuck in our UI. It's going to be a really simple tip. So let's add text. I'm pretty sure games like Gears of War actually have this in the beginning, in the tutorial section. It shows you where you need to go, etc. So I'm going to disable all of these UIs, and I'm pretty sure that this one is the big box, yeah, with our text. Well, it's just great. I'm going to remove this for now. I'm going to completely resize this to a really small size. That's 0.01. That's really small. 0, 1, 0, 1. And well, it seemed really small, but it's actually still way too big. At least it's centered correctly. Let's make it even smaller, so I'm just going to scale this one a bit. Wow, that doesn't want to play along. That's annoying. Okay, so it doesn't seem to work, so I'm just going to do it like this. Not really sure why scaling doesn't work, but that's fine. So that's a better size. I'm sure there's a better way to do this. I mean, this works, so I'm completely fine with it. There we go. So we have our tip, UI tip. So now this will need text. So let's add that text. UI text. Let's go to 2D to drag this out a bit. There we go. Has to be quite big. Let's disable 2D again. So this is going to be hold tab to enter cover. No fancy text, just basic action 80. Oh no, that's a bit exaggerated. Let's do 70. There we go. Now for some reason this looks absolutely horrible. 0.002 maybe. There we go. That looks better. Hold tab to enter cover. There we go. Now I don't want this tip to be visible all the time. Obviously I only want it to be visible once we enter our cover. So let's add actions to all of these. So I'm going to disable this tip, and then once we on player enter, we want to set set active. So we want to activate our tooltip. That's it. So that's literally all we're going to do. So really straightforward. Once we are inside of the cover though, hold tab. So what will happen when we hold tab? So we're going to change the state. So add action state, because we want our player to crouch. If you have better animations, please use those, but I'm just going to use the default states here, including game creator. And we're going to do set active again, but this time we want to disable our tip. Because we're already in cover, we don't need some tip to tell us what we just did. Now, lastly, what will happen once we exit our cover? And that's actually one really simple thing. So once we exit our cover, reset. No, let's just call on state. So what we're going to do is our player is not going to change his state, he's going to reset his state. And that's it. It will simply reset back to his original state. That's all. There we go. So let's hit play and actually see if any of this works. And then if this all works fine, we're going to do our very last thing, and that's actually set up his health and death to work. Hold tab to enter cover. We're in cover, and once we exit, it's gone, and once we enter that trigger box again, our tooltip reappears. And that's it. Perfect. So we have our cover set up. Now let's re-enable that UI because we did disable that, and let's actually set up that original trigger we put on our player in the beginning, so our conditions. So these conditions will basically determine what happens to our player. Is he going to take damage or is he going to die? Now if you've seen any of my previous tutorials, it will look slightly familiar, simply because it really is. It's really similar to what happened with our enemy UI AI, but this time it's for the player. So if our player health, let's go to stats, attribute value, if our player health is less or equal to 0, then some actions will happen. So first off, we want to call in that ragdoll. One tip, by the way, please don't copy this over from your enemy AI. This will just cause a mess. You can't just copy things over like that. Don't know why, it just won't work. Next up, we're going to activate our death screen. So this will activate, and Next up, we're going to disable, and this will happen at the same time. There's literally no delay between this. We're going to disable our normal UI because we don't want that to be visible anymore. And that's it. That's literally all. Because our death screen actually had that load save game. Next up, let's add the basic action of what happens. Actually, no, I completely forgot to do one thing here. So I want to add that effect we had that rotated the camera because that looked pretty cool. So let's grab rotate and camera rotate. The camera rotate automatically will pick the main camera, and it will well, just pitch the camera. So that means, I don't know what it means, but it goes in the right direction. If you do -10, it will go in the left direction. Really simple. You can make this a lot fancier. I'm just going to keep it. Don't know if this weight actually serves a purpose. I just feel more comfortable having it here, and that's it. Now, if we have more than 0 health, we just want to lose some health. So our player will lose health, and that's it. Maybe 20 is a bit much. On shot, he has 6 bullets, and it will take him 6 bullets to completely kill us off. I think that's fair. And again, if you are not using the shooter module, please change this trigger to on receive damage for the melee module. And if you do not have either of those, I would recommend getting one of those. There we go. So we have all of these things set up. I'm going to hit play, and I just want to see if it works. Let me actually make sure. I've noticed when duplicating scenes, our AI can sometimes lose some of his behavior values, and he has. So let's drag in the patrol gun, and let's drag in that view marker again. I don't know why that happens. It's a bit weird, but fine. Let's hit save, and let's hit play. There we go. So I'm going to walk over our save point. I'm going to go to our cover, hold tab to enter it. Our AI won't see us. That's just great. Let me also grab that revolver. Grab that ammo. Reload. There we go. Help! Yes, you can see us. Okay, we shot him once. And nothing is actually happening here, so we're not taking any damage whatsoever. Oh, we are taking damage. Our UI is just not set to our point. And load loss save will put us back. So let's actually make sure our so let's have a look here. Our health bar delay needs this, and our health bar delay needs to be set up slightly different as well. So it's going to be a filled horizontal left, and let's do the same here, filled horizontal left, because it needs to move, and it needs to recognize that this is actually related to health and not mana. So let's save this. So we were taking damage just fine. As you could see, after 6 shots, our death screen triggered, but our UI was not animating. Let's make this a fair fight as well. So we want our revolver, and there we go. Come on. Help! Oh, he already spotted us. Why am I such a horrible shot? Okay, we're taking damage. he's taking damage. And we hit our game over screen. And there we go. Back to our save. So I had one request to actually show you how to make sure the AI's health bar rotates as well. I thought I'd go over that here real quick, considering we're already doing everything UI related anyway, so we might as well do that. If you do not have an enemy AI set up here, then you can just skip this, or just see how it works. So what we're going to do is I'm going to add a trigger here. Again, this might not be the best way, but it definitely does work. So on start, we're going to go to action, rotate. We're going to use transform rotate towards, and our object is going to rotate towards the player. Now I have to make one small change to this because, as you might see, this is already rotated. So because this is rotated, I copied it over from somewhere else, it will not work properly because it will then rotate and be mirrored. So a really cheating easy fix is simply just adding a new child. So let's call this enemy UI, and we're going to drag this here, and our health UI will actually be a child of that. So this is rotated, but this one is not. Now when we go back to the action we just created, so let's call it action rotate UI, and we're simply going to drag in our new parent called enemy UI. I'm going to drag that in, so it's going to look at the player. Now when we hit play, we will see that his health bar rotates. It doesn't rotate towards us. I forgot something. So we need to make sure this repeats. So it needs to restart because it needs to update continuously. And again, I'm not really sure this is the best way to do it, but it works. So let's have this restart. There we go. And as you can see, it constantly restarts. And it rotates towards our player. That's it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It might have been a bit long, but I wanted to do something a bit more advanced than just a basic controller setup because, well, I mean, everyone can just right click, but actually having a UI, actually having events that happen on death, and loading your lost save is a bit more complex, but also a bit more useful, because you want something to actually happen with your player and not for him to just walk around, and that's pretty much it. So if you like this video, please hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.